welcome everyone to the third class of a series of the Great American Law Series with Fritz Van Mastrite. So take it away, Fritz.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the third session of our six-part series. We've got a lot of stuff to cover tonight, and you're going to learn some really good stuff. I don't know if I'll get to some of the really juicy parts that people are really waiting for concerning due process of law. I know that encompasses quite a bit, and it will answer a lot of questions for a lot of people. So hopefully we'll get to that tonight. If not, we'll just pick that up next week's session. So anyway, again, thanks for chiming in. And one quick thing here, I was hearing the talk just prior to me getting on camera here. I just want to address that issue about, civil disobedience, what have you. And but I'm going to read this from a court case, Myers versus Nebraska. It says here, the established doctrine is that liberty may not be interfered with under the guise of protecting public interest. That's a Supreme Court case. So just because they think that they have to do something for the public interest, that they can't get away with it just because of that. Okay, they cannot violate any provision of the Constitution just to, make the public feel safer. Okay, and just one more case here. Hale versus Henkel, another U.S. Supreme Court case. Anyway, talking about rights and what have you, existed by the law of the land, long antecedent to the organization of the state, and can only be taken from someone by due process of law and in accordance with the Constitution. Then it goes on to say he owes nothing to the public so long as he does not trespass upon their rights. So you got that should help settle that question or that issue. We don't owe anything to the public so long as we don't harm them or trespass upon their rights. It's that simple. No matter what excuse they come up with, their excuses are just simply not valid. So anyway, I'd like to start off with another story. Another personal experience I had, probably 1970, long time, I'm dating myself, I know, probably 1977. Could have been 70, yeah, 1977. Again, Salt Lake City, I was a general contractor again. I was working, building a roof on a re-roof, actually on a big commercial building near downtown Salt Lake City. And this was the era that Senator Frank Church from Idaho was introducing legislation and pushing this whole thing about, oh gosh, what was it? OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Act or something like that. And they got to a point where they passed this legislation and then they started sending their agents out into the field. And I remember, when I lived in Salt Lake, I was watching television one night, and actually through the whole week, you saw on the late night news that these Utah State OSHA inspectors and federal OSHA inspectors were teaming up and going through the Salt Lake Valley, just showing up at the different construction sites and looking for all kinds of violations, just stupid stuff. Okay, and then they would write a ticket. They would write a citation to, the contractor, and these tickets came with $1,000 fine per day until the, deficiency was corrected. So, I didn't think much about it, and I went to work one day, and I was up on the roof. I had all my guys up on this roof, about 2.5 stories above the ground. Had my ladder up against the building, doing what we've always done, the way it's always been done. And, late morning, here comes two guys up my ladder onto the roof in three-piece suits. wearing helmets. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, I think I know what that's about. Okay. And they yelled over, hey, who's in charge here? And I said, who wants to know? And we are with state, Utah OSHA department. Also, I'm with the federal OSHA department. And come to inspect your job site here. I said, oh, really? He says, yeah. He says, and he starts getting his citation book out. He's writing all these deficiencies down in it. And he says, I says, what is the problem? He says, well, for one, none of you workers are wearing helmet. And, I get a little cocky under those circumstances. And I look at this guy and I go, oh, really? And then I look up in the sky like that and I go, helmet? For what reason? There's absolutely nothing above. Is it, are you afraid that a bird might come and crap on our head? Okay. And then he goes, very funny. And then he says, and here's another violation. Your ladder is not extending 3.5 or so feet above the roof. And you do not have a barrier that's 3 foot, 3.5 foot high and 4 foot on either side of the ladder, like a railing. And I says, that's right. And I says, let me tell you something. Before you guys go any further, I'm informing you that you are trespassing. Okay, this is private property. This is my private job site. I'm responsible here, and you are trespassing. All right. Now, you guys came up upon my ladder, which is my private property, without my written permission. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you my verbal permission to go back down that ladder the way you came up. All right. And get out of here and leave me alone. And these guys got really cocky with me and they said, no, we ain't going down. We ain't leaving until we're finished here. I said, oh, really? I said, listen, I'm extending you the courtesy to use my ladder to get off of my job site. And he says, well, we're not done here. And this one guy's a pretty big guy, bigger than me. And so I said, okay, I'm trying to be nice, but if you're not going to take me up on my offer to get off my roof, down my ladder, if you're not going to do that right here and now, then I promise you, you will go off this roof another way. And then I stepped into him. And then he backed up. And then he goes, oh, okay. And both these guys scurried down my ladder, went over to their car, got in, and they left, never to be seen or heard from again. But yet you turn on the news, it was about a 2-week period of time, every night, all the contractors that were being cited and fined, some of them thousands of dollars a day, some of these big, huge jobs. It was insane. But yet they came to me to try to do the same thing, and I stood up to them. First confrontation, never came back. Never heard from them again. And I'm going to point something out to them. It has to do with notice of violation. Okay? If you don't stand up and turn it around and say, hey, no, wait a minute, you're the one that is in violation here. So 2 so-called violations don't make a right. So you committed an offense against me, of which now I have a claim against you. If I want to pursue it, I will win this. Okay, you won't. And you're going to lose your immunity. So that's why these people are trained. They know how far they can go, just like IRS agents that know. They know how far they can go and what type of status certain people have. And if they have that status, they leave them alone. They're instructed to. In fact, their field manual tells them, leave those type of people alone. So again, first confrontation is your best opportunity to settle these matters. Put the violation back on them, make them start to feel some shame, and make them go away. So there it is.
Love it, love it, love it, love it. Thank you, Fritz. It's so inspiring. Every time I hear your stories, I think, wow, I'm just so trained. I'm so compliant. I'm such a good boy, But we're what?
Well, most people have been walking submissively all of their lives. Look at the business owners. Submissiveness. Where's the gumption to stand up and say, you know what? I don't need your stinking license.
Yeah. And it's
I don't need your stinking license, and I don't honor your warrants.
Yeah.
How's that possible? Well, you're going to learn that later. So,
yeah, and then it's on TV, right? So everyone is like it's this agreement. Everyone thinks that everyone thinks everyone's doing it, so everyone should do it because everyone's doing it, and that's circular logic. It doesn't work.
Exactly. And in the class tonight, I'm going to show a slide with a quote on it, U.S. versus Minker, about being submissive, being ignorant, of the law. Because you're ignorant of the law, you think that you have to comply because it appears to be the law, when in actuality, it's not. You'll see that again tonight. So this is a big part of the problem. People don't know, unfortunately. So, all right, ready to get started? Okay, this is the Great American Law Series, Overcoming the Oppression of Government, Part 3. All right, we've all been through this, all the preliminary stuff. And again, I'm not an attorney and I'm not giving legal advice here. And please don't ask for any. I might lead you astray. You all have the schedule. Again, here the purpose is to stand up and take effective action against oppressive government. All right, all the formalities and topics this evening are going to be American Christian heritage. We're going to have a little segment on that. So it fits into this as a very important segment to what we're learning. Then we're going to talk about rights and privileges, law, and our true authority. Then we're going to have get into codes, rules, regulations, statutes, ordinances, and all of that nonsense. And if we have time, we'll start the due process of law segment. Okay. All right. All right. We'll talk about Americans' Christian heritage. I want everybody to read this. This is the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. That's what I would like you to predominantly or primarily focus on right now. Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Okay. So Congress can't make any law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Well, we can see that's exactly what they're doing today, our local officials. All right. It cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that this great nation was founded not by religionists, but by Christians, not on religion, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ. For that reason alone, people of other faiths have been afforded freedom of worship here. That's Patrick Henry, 1776. Now, there's a lot of people in our nation today that are not aware of this. They're not aware of the Christian heritage of America. And I'm just going to give a little excerpts here on it to give you an idea of what that's about. America, a Christian nation. America is deeply rooted in the traditions of the Bible, Christianity, and the Ten Commandments. These Christian principles were coupled with and connected with the common law by Christian men who studied and knew the Bible. Our early government was designed to protect the individual rights of man and the free exercise of the Christian faith. Our early system of laws promoted the concept of freedom through self-government. Now, these are not so much my words as they are words of the founders, many of the founders, and many of the Supreme Court justices and state court justices through this era, especially, and many, many decades after the founding of America. Our current system of convoluted law in America still has fine threads running through it that can be traced directly back to the Ten Commandments. And remember, last week we talked about common law and how common law was, coupled with principles of the Bible and Christianity. So this is where it's going. We have staked the whole future of the American civilization not upon the power of government, far from it. We have staked the future upon the capacity of each and all of us to govern ourselves, to sustain ourselves according to the Ten Commandments of God. James Madison. Okay, this is from a Florida case, Strauss versus Strauss. Every system of law known to civilized society generated from or had as its complement one of the three well-known systems of ethics: pagan, Stoic, or Christian. The common law draws its subsistence from the latter. Its roots go deep into that system. The Christian concept of right and wrong, or right and justice, motivates every rule of equity. It is the guide by which we dissolve domestic friction and the rule by which all legal controversies are settled. It's interesting, from around different parts of the country, many of the day were speaking much of the same language. Wilkinson versus City of Rome, Georgia case. Christianity entered into the whole warp and woof of our US governmental fabric. Many of the statesmen of this country treated Christianity as a part of the law of the land. Christianity is the only religion known to our American law. Perky Brothers versus Commonwealth, and 1922. From the creation of the state until the present time, this state has been recognized as a Christian state. The framers of those early laws knew then, as we know now, that we are a Christian people, and the morality of the country is deeply engrafted upon Christianity. Although we can all recognize that times are changing fast. We think it cannot be successfully controverted that this US government was founded on the principles of Christianity by men either dominated by or reared amidst its influence. That's a Minnesota case in 1927. Here's a well-known case of it for its day. Supreme Court decision 1892 concerning the Church of the Holy Trinity versus the United States. Our laws and our institutions must necessarily be based upon and embody the teachings of the Redeemer of mankind. It is impossible that it should be otherwise. And in this sense, and to this extent, our civilization and our institutions are emphatically Christian. This is a religious people. This is historically true. From the discovery of this continent to the present hour, there is a single voice making this affirmation. We find everywhere a clear recognition of the same truth. These and many other matters which might be noticed add a volume of unofficial declarations to the mass of organic utterances that this is a Christian nation. On July 4th, 1821, President Adams, John Quincy Adams, said, "The highest glory of the American Revolution was this. It connected in one indissoluble bond the principles of civil government with the principles of Christianity." And that, you remember, we went over on our last class last week. Daniel Webster once said that if we abide by the principles taught in the Bible, our country will go on prospering. William Blackstone said, "This law of nature, being co-equal with mankind and dictated by God himself, is of course superior in obligation to any other. It is binding over all the globe, in all countries, and at all times. No human laws are of any validity if contrary to this. Upon these two foundations, the law of nature and the law of revelation, depend all human laws. That is to say, no human laws should be suffered to contradict these." Alex de Tocqueville was a well-known French statesman at the time. He said, "I sought for the key of the greatness and genius of America. in her harbors and in her fields and boundless forests, in her rich mines and vast world commerce, in her public school system and institutions of higher learning. I saw for it in her Democratic Congress and in her matchless Constitution. Not until I went into the churches of America and heard her pulpits flame with righteousness did I understand the secrets of her genius and power. America is great because America is good. If America ever ceases to be good, it will cease to be great. So very profound statements. Okay, so we can see that many of the founders and many even people from outside the country understood the Christian heritage of America and the connection with biblical principles. Okay, now we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts everybody has been longing for. Uh-oh. All right, you got rights. I got mine. I hope you got yours. All right. Rights are defined generally as powers of free action. Comes out of Black's Law Dictionary. You're going to get several definitions here, and then we'll put it all together. Right. What is a right? It is a power, it's authority, etc., belong to one by divine right, nature, God, etc. An extension of man's individuality. It is a basic natural rights are life, liberty, and property. The preservation of any one of these is completely dependent upon the preservation of the other two. And if you've all been reading your little booklet from Frederick Bastiat, The Law, you will recognize that principle. Man has an inherent right to protect and preserve these rights. So let's look at where rights come from. Very important to know. Rights come from our Creator, not from man or government. Okay, as well stated in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. We've all heard that. I'm sure we've all heard that. All right. Neither the federal constitution nor the state constitutions grant any rights whatsoever. They don't come from man or government or the constitutions. So what about privileges? Are they the same as rights? We're going to find out. Rights are not the same, privileges are not the same as rights. Rights cannot be given by governments or man, but governments do grant privileges in exchange for one's right. And that's where we start to get into problems. Let's see what the privilege means. I want you to pay very close attention to this because you're going to see something very, very interesting here. A privilege is a favor, advantage, benefit, etc., granted to some person, group, or persons, or class not enjoyed by others, and is sometimes detrimental to them. A basic civil right guaranteed by a government. So we know they're not rights. Now, this is a very interesting definition that comes out of Black's Law Dictionary. Privilege is defined as a particular and peculiar benefit or advantage enjoyed by a person, company, or class beyond the common advantage or advantages of other citizens, as an exceptional or extraordinary power or exemption, a right, power, franchise, or immunity held by a person or class against or beyond the course of the law. Did you get that? Privilege is held oftentimes against the law or beyond the course of the law. And I might add, this is where we see this happen all the time with corporations and applications for corporate status. You grant certain privileges and immunities that you otherwise would not have as a free American. Okay. Typical ways rights are referred to. And I'm sure we've all heard these sometime or another. And for many people, it gets very, very confusing what this all means. We're going to break this all down. So there's constitutional rights, there's legal rights, civil liberties, legal rights, unalienable rights, personal rights, natural rights, God-given rights, if you will, and other rights, but too numerous to mention here. So we'll start with constitutional rights. In truth, there is no such thing as constitutional rights. The constitutions do not confer any rights whatsoever. It is incorrect to refer to one's rights as constitutional. It is a misnomer. They should be referred to as constitutionally secured unalienable rights. Okay. Civil liberties can be lumped together as they are basically meaning one and the same thing. They, in fact, are not rights at all, but mere privileges granted by governments. They are called rights to deceive the masses, to make them believe that these are their rights. With all these privileges comes licenses, fees, restrictions, codes, rules, and regulations. Unalienable rights, personal rights, natural rights, God-given rights. These rights can be lumped together also because they all mean basically the same thing. These rights come from our Creator and not from man or governments. Through these rights comes one's sovereign birthright, authority, and power. Okay, from a U.S. Supreme Court case, U.S. versus Raddatz, here's what they had to say. This case has to do with the differences between unalienable rights and civil rights. And it's very clear here that they're not the same. Civil rights by American law exclude natural freeborn citizens. Or in other words, natural freeborn citizens have unalienable rights, okay, and not civil rights. Whereas those who are adopted in or come in under a different status hold the civil rights, who are not natural freeborn citizens. And that was made clear in the 1866 Civil Rights federal legislation. Okay, let's take the word unalienable. We're going to break this down to see what it really means. Okay, I like to use the word unalienable as opposed to inalienable. One, it's the one that they use in the Declaration of Independence. And two, you're going to see the second reason why I like it as we break this word down. Let's take the prefix un. It's Latin, means in, and to the negative elements in no, not, or nor, such as cannot be taken away. Un, not, lack of, or the opposite of, as in unhappy. Un. It is added to a verb to indicate a reversal of the action of the verb. Okay, so un, not. All right, let's look at the word alienable. It means capable of being alienated or transferred to a new owner. Also capable of being liened. So if you put the word un in front of that, that means it's not capable of being liened. It's not capable of being alienated or transferred to a new owner. Look at the word lien by itself. It means to bond or tie. In law, a claim on the property of another as security against the payment of a just debt. So unalienable rights are something that cannot be liened, alienated, transferred, or given away. These are rights you will always have. The question, though, is, are your rights active or dormant? If they're dormant, then you are exercising government privileges. And people say, well, if you're, previously we're talking about, we surrender our rights to the agencies of government. That's true. Most people do surrender their rights. But it's not so much them surrendering their rights to government as they are surrendering their will, if you will, to not exercise their rights. I think that's more correctly put. So even though we surrender our rights to government or seemingly give them away, they're always there and we can always reclaim them It's just a matter of you understanding that and claiming them and stop surrendering yourself. If you are exercising your government granted privileges, then you are not free, but walking in bondage and living in captivity. This is not the way to exercise your divine birthright. The following court opinions and law maxims give clarity to the fact that rights are what allows man to live and walk in his divine birthright. Very important. Okay. You see, we have not only the law on our side, we have these court decisions on our side. People of a state are entitled to all the rights which formerly belonged to the king by his prerogative. Interesting, huh? People of a state are entitled to all the rights which formerly belonged to the king by his prerogative. Wow. Here's a California appellate court case. As a general rule, men have a right to do anything which their inclinations may suggest, if it be not evil in itself, and in no way impairs the rights of others. The individual may stand upon his constitutional rights or secured rights as a citizen. He is entitled to carry on his private business in his own way. His power to contract is unlimited. His rights are such as existed by the law of the land, long antecedent to the organization of the state, and can only be taken from him by due process of law and in accordance with the Constitution. He owes nothing to the public so long as he does not trespass upon their rights. The rights of the individual are restricted only to the extent that they have been voluntarily surrendered by the citizenships to the agencies of government. You've already heard this. Okay, another California appellate court case, 1929. A state cannot divest or impair vested rights, whether by statute, ordinance, or constitutional amendment. Let's see what the word divest means, or vested means. Vested, that means fixed, settled, absolute, not contingent upon anything. So your rights are not contingent upon anything, are they? Miranda versus Arizona, U.S. Supreme Court had this to say: where rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rulemaking or legislation which would abrogate them. Another U.S. Supreme Court case, 1943. The very purpose of the Bill of Rights was to withdraw certain subjects from the vicissitudes of political controversy, to place them beyond the reach of majorities and officials, and to establish them as legal principles to be applied by the courts. One's right to life, liberty, and property, to free speech, a free press, freedom of worship and assembly, and other fundamental rights may not be submitted to vote. They are dependent upon the outcome of no elections. Okay. In this court case, they had to say this: that the right of the citizen to travel upon the public highways and to transfer his property thereon, either by carriage or by automobile, is not a mere privilege which a city may prohibit or permit at will, but a common right, which he has under the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren had this to say back in 1954. I believe the entire Bill of Rights came into being because of the knowledge our forefathers had of the Bible and their belief in it. And here we go, that U.S. versus Minker quote I told you about. Because of what appears to be a lawful command on the surface, many citizens, because of their respect for what only appears to be law, are cunningly coerced into waiving their rights due to ignorance. So we have to learn what's really going on to stop being coerced into waiving our rights. The word waive, in law, to forego or relinquish voluntarily, as a right which one is legally entitled to enforce. U.S. Supreme Court Briers versus U.S. had this to say: rights must be interpreted in favor of the citizen. No unlawful searches and seizures. Okay, all right. Are you still there, Clint? Hold on here.
Yes, I'm sorry. Do you need something?
Everything went dead over here on this end. What happened? What happened? Did you shut everything down?
It just went out of screen share mode. You might have hit stop screen share. So try sharing screen again.
Okay, but you could still hear me at the on the other side though.
Oh yeah, you're doing great.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go back.
Okay.
All right, sorry about that. Okay. It is the duty of the courts to be watchful for the constitutional rights of the citizen and against stealthy encroachments thereon. So we can see the thinking and the language of the Supreme Court and many other courts around the country in our earlier days in this country. Something that we don't recognize from the courts today, which is not such a good thing because these courts are not so much on our side anymore as they were in these days that we're, the cases we're going through right now. All right, U.S. Supreme Court, Myers versus Nebraska. The term liberty denotes not merely freedom from bodily restraint, but also the right of the individual to contract, to engage in any of the common occupations of life, to acquire useful knowledge, to marry, to establish a home and bring up children, to worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience. The established doctrine is that this liberty may not be interfered with under the guise of protecting public interest by legislative action. You heard that early at the beginning of the class. Okay. All right. Personal liberty consists in the power of locomotion, of changing situation, of removing one's person to whatever place one's inclination may direct, without imprisonment or restraint unless by due course of law. So all these lockdowns and wearing the mask and doing what we're told and moving the way we're supposed to move and act, you can see is not lawful. None of it is being done by the due course of law. Now we're going to get into the Bill of Rights here. Everyone here, I hope, is familiar with the Bill of Rights. If not, you need to be. We all know that the Bill of Rights is found within the Constitution for the United States of America. And okay, Bill of Rights. What I want to do, I just want to briefly go through those freedoms or those rights that we have enumerated in the Bill of Rights through the first 10 amendments. And then we're going to go over some of the other unalienable rights that are not specifically listed here, to give you an idea of some of the other rights that you have. Okay, so Amendment 1, this concerns with the right to freedom of religion, right to freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to peaceably assemble, freedom of the people to petition government for the redress of grievances. It's very important to know these things, know where to go to get, the confirmation of your right that's in the Declaration of, the Bill of Rights. Okay, Amendment 2. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And I put it down here, the definition or a definition of the word infringe. And tell me if Congress and the state legislatures and the local officials are not in violation or not infringing. Okay, infringe means to break a law or agreement. Also to fail to observe the terms of a contract, terms of an agreement, which is terms of their oath, agreement to their oath of office that they will not infringe. Okay, it also means violate and to encroach or trespass upon. So when they infringe or when they even bring up the matter of gun control on the floor of the House, that is a breach of their oath of office. And they are actually, according to the US Code, committing acts of treason because they violated the terms of their oath, and they're trespassing or attempting to trespass upon our rights. Amendment 3, no soldiers to be quartered in any house without consent of the owner. So far, we haven't had to deal with that, but you never know. Amendment 4, okay, we all have a right to be secure in our person, in our houses, in our papers, and in our effects. Okay, we have a right against unreasonable searches and seizures. And I want you to pay attention to this right here. The right that no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched. See the word "and" in red there, underlined, and the person or things to be seized. That word "and" is not an extra word in there. It has very, very specific meaning. What does that do? It ties these two things together. It says, particularly describing the place to be searched. The warrant is supposed to describe the place to be searched, not or, but and. So it's going to describe the place to be searched, and it's going to describe the persons or the things to be seized. So if they're coming into your house or your business with a lawful warrant, they are coming in there to take possession of a person or a thing, and they're going to take it out of there if they find it. That has to be there. And I have seen search warrants that they claim are lawful that have only one of those listed on the warrant. It's not describing the person or things to be seized. It's just describing the particular place to be searched. That's it. That's not lawful, but we see that over and over and over again. Okay, so you need to be aware of that. Warrants need to have these two things on it at the same time. All right, moving on. Fifth Amendment. You have a right not to answer for capital or infamous crime without presentment or indictment of a grand jury. You have a right not to have life or limb put twice into jeopardy for the same offense. You also have the right not to be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against yourself. And by the way, a IRS 1040 label form is a Fifth Amendment return. You are acting as a witness against yourself. Think about that. Right not to be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Due process of law, by the way, is the law of the land. It's a common law. Right not to have private property taken without just compensation. All right, Amendment 6. We have a right to a speedy and public trial in all criminal prosecutions by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime was committed. You also have a right to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation. And there's a proper format and process that must follow also. Right to confront the witnesses that are against you. You have a right to obtain witnesses also in your favor. You have a right to have counsel for your defense. It cannot be denied. And it does not have to be a barred attorney. That's not what the word counsel means here. Many times the judges will say, well, you got to hire an attorney to come back into my courtroom. Well, we'll see about that. It's not true. All right, Amendment 7. Right of trial by jury in suits at common law. Interesting, they're mentioning the common law. They're not mentioning, by the way, as you can see, admiralty or maritime or administrative law, but common law, where value in controversy shall exceed $20. No facts tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of common law. There's that common law again. Wow. What did they know that most people don't know today? Still carved in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. All right, Amendment 8. We all have the right to know or to not have excessive bail, and the right to not no excessive fines, or not to have cruel and unusual punishment inflicted upon us. I've seen some real cruel and unusual punishment even in this day and age. It happens all the time. Cruel and unusual punishment, even unto death, when they were not even convicted of a capital crime. All right, Amendment 9. Rights retained by the people that are not enumerated in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights shall not be denied or disparaged. In other words, shall not be denied you and I. And finally, Amendment 10, powers not delegated to the United States or to the states are reserved to, guess who? Yours truly, you and me. All right. And yes, we have more rights that are listed here, specifically enumerated. I'm going to start to get into that. Okay, these are some of the unalienable rights not specifically mentioned in the Bill of Rights, but we can infer from the Bill of Rights many of these in actuality. But I wanted to break it down here a little bit just so you get a clear picture of this. So here's some of your unalienable rights. Right to freedom of movement, right to travel, right of association, right of thought, right of contract, right to breathe freely and unobstructed. Anybody been going through that lately? Right to be free from executive orders, right of locomotion, right of self-action, right of conscience, right to personal health choices. Wow. Right to be out and about. They seem to want to make that a crime these days, but just you want to be out and about. Okay, how about right to sing, right to walk in the park, right to go sailing, right to ride your bicycle, right to walk along the beach, right to meet with others, right to avoid stupid people, right to teach, right to work, and right just to be me or you. Okay, let's get into the law. Where there is no vision, the people perish. But he that keepeth the law, happy is he. Proverbs 29:18. Interesting, the Bible talks about the law a lot, and vision and knowledge. It all ties in. The Creator's law is supreme, and all legitimate authority on earth flows through his law. The laws of nature are the laws of God, whose authority can be superseded by no power on earth. A legislature must not obstruct our obedience to him, from whose punishments they cannot protect us. All human constitutions which contradict his laws, we are in conscience bound to disobey. Such have been the adjudications of our courts of justice. Yes, this is a 1772 case in the General Court of Virginia. It's Robin versus Hardaway. I misspelled that. There is no S on Robin. It's Robin versus Hardaway. Now, the significance of this case, it is a landmark case. And it is a landmark, it is actually the landmark case that Stanford Law Review uses in their review, in their law review. They use this as their landmark case, one of their primary landmark case. Interesting enough, Cornell University Law Review also uses the same exact case. I find that very, very encouraging and also very interesting. Okay, there we go. All right, we're gonna want to discuss the lawful order of authority here in America. All right. I've never seen it portrayed the way I'm going to portray it to you. I'm sure that most all of you have heard the term supreme law of the land. And most all of us know what that means. That means the Constitution for the United States of America. That is the supreme law of the land. The law of the land is the common law. Supreme law of the land is the Constitution. Okay. And I'm going to show you that there's a couple of components that were really missing when this has been portrayed in years past and in other institutions where they talk about the supreme law of the land. Okay, so here's how it goes. This is the order of lawful authority in America. Starts with the supreme law of God. All right, the 10 Commandments. This is the source. This is where it starts. Call him God, call him creator, but nonetheless, it's the source. Then we have the supreme law of the people in this specific order, okay, which I call the Great American Law. Then we have the supreme law of the land, Constitution for the United States of America, okay? So God, the people, the Constitution, okay? And in this particular line of authority, this is the chain of authority. All right. So the people's true authority we get from the Declaration of Independence. This is the Constitution of the collective sovereign people of America, from which they derive their just and lawful power. This is it, folks. This is where you get your lawful and just power from. This Declaration of Independence. This was the spark that ignited the whole thing. And I encourage everyone to read that Declaration of Independence and read it more than once. And what I like to do, what I've done in the past, I've taken on a piece of paper and enumerated all the things that, that the king was doing against these people in the colonies. And then on the other side of the sheet, I list or check to see how many of those apply to our situation today. And I hope many of you have done that. I hope you've all done that, actually. You'd be surprised. We're getting pretty close to the same thing that happened back in the colonial times. So here, just a quick review. The 10 Commandments is the supreme law of God. The Great American Law is the supreme law of the people. And finally, the Constitution for the United States of America is the supreme law of the land. What I'd like to do while we're on this section here, it's a little bit small for you to see, but I'm going to read it to you here. I'll just read it real quickly. And I entitled this, "The Constitution is superior to any ordinary act of the legislature." And that's, so you can, if you can follow with me on the screen, this is basically what it says. And this is from Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 1803. "The powers of the legislature are defined and limited, and that those limits may not be mistaken or forgotten, the Constitution is written. To what purpose are powers limited, and to what purpose is that limitation committed to writing, if these limits may at any time be passed by those intended to be restrained? This distinction between a government with limited and unlimited power is abolished if those limits do not confine the person on whom they are imposed. And if acts prohibited and acts allowed are of equal obligation, it is a proposition too plain to be contested that the Constitution controls any legislative act repugnant to it, or that the legislature may alter the Constitution by any ordinary act. Between these alternatives, there is no middle ground. The Constitution is either a superior paramount law, unchangeable by ordinary means, or it is on a level with ordinary legislative acts, and like other acts, is alterable with part of the alternative be true, then the legislative act, contrary to the Constitution, is not law. But if the latter part be true, then written constitutions are an absurd attempts on the part of the people to limit the power in its own nature illimitable. If then the courts are to regard the Constitution, and the Constitution is superior to any ordinary act of the legislature, the Constitution and not ordinary acts must govern the case to which they both apply. Why does a judge swear to discharge his duties agreeably to the Constitution of the United States if that Constitution forms no rule for his government? If it is closed upon him and cannot be inspected by him? If such to be the real state of things, this is worse than solemn mockery. To prescribe or take this oath becomes equally a crime. It is also not entirely unworthy of observation that in declaring what shall be the supreme law of the land, the Constitution itself is first mentioned, and not the laws of the United States generally, but those only which shall be made in pursuance of the Constitution have that rank. Thus, the particular phraseology of the Constitution of the United States confirms and strengthens the principle supposed to be essential to all written constitutions, that a law repugnant to the Constitution is void, and that courts are as well as other departments are bound by the instrument. I know there's a little lengthy, a little hard to follow, but it's a very important principle to understand when it comes to your Constitution and the law. Okay, this diagram, this is a simple diagram of the flow of power in a Christian-based government. Okay, and this, many of the founders understood this flow chart and professed this type of system of government. Of course, it starts with the Creator, and then he hands down his law. His law goes down to man, of course. From God you have God's Spirit, then you have his church, if you will. But it all comes down through the center spine through man as an individual. Okay, and there's three separate branches here. Through the center spine, you have his collective dominion over the civil government. And then that includes the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution for the United States of America, coming down through the separations of powers of legislative, executive, judicial. These are all powers held in trust. They come down to the final box at the bottom, okay, where these other two left and right branches come down to also. So man has been charged to, multiply and be fruitful. Okay, so he multiplies through self-government, for family government. He raises a family, protects the young, teaches the law, prepares for self-government. And on the other side, on the right, you get to be fruitful. He's been commanded to be fruitful, again, through self-government, to go earn a livelihood, and interact with the marketplace, free enterprise, and all this comes together at the bottom where man is fulfilling his individual duty according to conscience. And that's pretty simple. It's pretty simple, basic structure of a Christian-based government. Okay. Again, the wording here is a little small. I'm going to read it to you, but here, this is Congress declares Bible the Word of God. This is Public Law 97-280, October 4th, 1982. Okay, this is 97th Congress. You find it 96 statute at large, section or whatever, 1211. And this is a joint resolution authorizing and requesting the president to proclaim 1983 as the year of the Bible. The reason I want to read this, it clarifies a few things concerning the origin of, the United States and its government. It starts out here. Whereas the Bible, the Word of God, has made a unique contribution in shaping the United States as a distinctive and blessed nation and people. Whereas deeply held religious convictions springing from Holy Scriptures led to the earliest settlement of our nation. Whereas biblical teachings inspired concepts of civil government that are contained in our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. Whereas many of our great national leaders, among them Presidents Washington, Jackson, Lincoln, and Wilson, paid tribute to the surpassing influence of the Bible in our country's development. As in the words of President Jackson, that the Bible is the rock on which our republic rests. Whereas the history of our nation clearly illustrates the value of voluntarily applying the teachings of the Scriptures in the lives of individuals, families, and societies. Whereas this nation now faces great challenges that will test this nation as it has never been tested before. And whereas that renewing our knowledge of and faith in God through Holy Scriptures can strengthen us as a nation and a people, now therefore be it resolved in the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America, in Congress assembled, that the President is authorized and requested to designate 1983 as the National Year of the Bible in recognition of both the formative influence of the Bible has been for our nation and our national need to study and apply the teachings of the Holy Scriptures. That was approved October 4th, 1982. So you can see there's a clear understanding of the America's Christian heritage here, even in relatively modern times, 1982. All right, moving on. Let's now get into some of the definitions of law. Let's see what this law thing is all about. Law is that thing which is laid down, ordained, and established of the eternal God, such as the Ten Commandments, his statutes and ordinances for his people. Law is also force. And those, again, who read The Law by Frederick Bastiat will recognize this, will remember this. Law is force. And also Frederick Bastiat said that it is the collective organization of the individual right to lawful defense. He also said it is the substitution of a common force for individual forces. And from Yickwo versus Hopkins, a U.S. Supreme Court case, the law is the definition and limitation of power. Here's a very interesting concept. These concepts come from Frederick Bastiat. And he basically says this: it is what law is force. It is what dissuades man from injustice and compels him to justice. It is law and force that keeps a person within the bounds of justice. It is this negative concept of law and force that imposes and violates nothing, but obligates someone only to abstain from harming others. Now, isn't that an interesting concept? Law is a negative force. It imposes and it violates nothing. Okay, it just keeps us from harming others. That's the intention. As a negative concept, law naturally organizes justice for good. But if organized for anything else other than justice, such as religion, education, and labor, it becomes a positive concept of law for evil and destroys justice. For now, force is illegitimately used to shape and compel religion, education, and labor at the hands and whims of unjust men. Concepts from Frederick Bastiat, the law. Law is a collective organization of the individual right to lawful defense. As expressed in the Declaration of Independence, man is endowed by his creator with certain unalienable rights, among which is the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or property. What goes hand in hand with these unalienable rights is man's natural right of the individual to defend his life, his liberty, and his property. And so if the individual can defend his rights, then individuals can come together collectively to defend their rights. Therefore, is the legitimate purpose of law and government. All common civil law in America is predicated upon three principles. Three principles only: that you do not injure or kill your fellow man, that you do not harm or steal your fellow man's property, and that you do not violate or trespass upon your fellow man's rights. And these three principles, believe it or not, I believe it was the first legislative session of California State Legislature in 1879, when they were instituting the Civil Code of Procedures, I believe it was. It says right in there that the purpose, that all laws in California are predicated upon these three principles. All law is predicated on this. Interesting. Common law is not that difficult. Okay. Yickwo versus Hopkins, U.S. Supreme Court, 1886. You've all heard this. I would just want to read it again, get it drilled into your mind. Sovereignty itself is, of course, not subject to law, for it is the author and source of law. But in our system, while sovereign powers are delegated to the agencies of government, sovereignty remains with the people, by whom and for whom all government exists and acts. And the law is the definition and limitation of power. For the very idea that one man may be compelled to hold his life or the means of living or any material right essential to the enjoyment of life at the mere will of another seems to be intolerable in any country where freedom prevails, as being the essence of slavery itself. Do we have people talking like that today? Very, very rare. All right, we're gonna get into some types of law. I chose these because these are predominantly what we're dealing with today here in America. There's many other types of law, but these are the ones we're gonna cover. Common law, admiralty, maritime law, administrative law, law of the land, Babylonian Talmud, Sharia law. And you'll see why I brought in Babylonian Talmud and the Sharia law. That'll become clear in a moment. Okay. Common law, as distinguished from law created by the enactment of legislatures, the common law comprises the body of those principles and rules of action relating to the government and security, persons, and property, which derive their authority solely from the usages and customs of immemorial antiquity, and from judgments and decrees of the courts recognizing, affirming, and enforcing such usages and customs, and in this sense, particularly the ancient unwritten law of England. We covered that last week, just as a reminder. Admiralty law, a court which has a very extensive jurisdiction of maritime causes, civil and criminal, controversies arising out of acts done upon or relating to the sea, and questions of prize. Okay, admiralty is basically law of the sea. Was not intended to come upon the land. But in later classes, we're going to go over this admiralty law versus common law and administrative laws and show you how this admiralty law came upon the land and kind of pushed the common law aside so they could get what they wanted from us. All right. Maritime law pertaining to the sea or ocean or the navigation thereof, or to commerce conducted by navigation of the sea, or in America of the Great Lakes and rivers. Administrative law, that branch of public law which deals with the various organs of the sovereign power considered as in motion, and prescribes in detail the manner of their activity, being concerned with such topics as the collection of revenue, the regulation of military and naval forces, citizenship and naturalization, sanitary measures, laws concerning the poor, coinage, police, and public safety and morals, etc., etc. All right. And here this I call the fourth branch of government. We've got the legislative, executive, judicial branches. Okay, those are duly constituted, but we got another fourth branch that kind of crept in on us from almost seemingly out of nowhere. Here it is, administrative law. And the administrators of these administrative tribunals typically don't hold lawful, actual judicial power. They're just administrators. They're just doing a ministerial task. Okay. And we'll get into that later. All right. Justice Felix Frankfurter, U.S. Supreme Court, concurring in this U.S. Supreme Court case, United States versus mine workers, said, the historic phrase, a government of laws and not of men, epitomizes the distinguishing character of our political society. Law alone saves a society from being ruled by mere brute power, however disguised. If one man can be allowed to determine for himself what is law, every man can. That means first chaos, then tyranny. Let's go back to the top and look at this first phrase, a government of laws and not of men. What was he referring to here? Okay, a government of laws versus a government of man. We're talking about basically a republic versus a democracy. And we're going to get into that. We're going to break that down a little later. But I want you to, this is what he's talking about here. Okay. What happens under democracy, it seems like any man can determine for himself what the law is. And what does that bring? Chaos and then tyranny. Okay. Law of the land. Due process of law. By the law of the land is most clearly intended the general law which hears before it condemns, which proceeds upon inquiry and renders judgment only after trial. The meaning is that every citizen shall hold his life, liberty, property, and immunities under the protection of general rules which govern society. Continuing, everything which may pass under the form of an enactment is not the law of the land. Every form of an enactment. Interesting. It means due process of law warranted by the Constitution, by the common law adopted by the Constitution, or by statutes passed in pursuance of the Constitution. Babylonian Talmud. Why did I bring this into this mix? Seems so out of place. Well, the Babylonian Talmud serves as the basis for all codes of the rabbinic law. Why is this important? Well, this is a system of thousands of codes, rules, regulations, and ordinances about, I can't remember exactly, it's 23 or 28,000 different codes, rules, regulations, ordinances, which the people are subject to, okay? And from which our modern day de facto illegitimate legal system and government was derived. Let me read that one more time. This is a system of thousands of codes, rules, regulations, ordinances from which our modern day de facto or illegitimate and illegal legal system and government were derived. Now, I know a lot of people take exception to that. However, I'll tell you where I got this from. I got this from the official historian of the United States, who was also the personal aide of General MacArthur in the Korean War. His name is Gene Scott. All right. And this is what I got from him personally. He turned me on to this. I didn't believe it at the time. When I researched it, when he pointed me in that direction, I was blown away with what I found. Look at America today. We got over 61,000 million codes, rules, regulations, and ordinances on the books throughout America. Yeah, there's many duplicates of those across the country, but it's over 61 million. That's insanity, folks. That's not the common law. That's not the way it's supposed to be. Okay? So this is where we get our codes, rules, regulations, ordinances from. That's where they're hanging their hat. And by the way, this is the Babylonian Talmud. We're talking the ancient Babylonian mystery religion. Sharia law. Why did I bring this up? Because in America, last I checked, there were over 110 Sharia law courts that have officially been established on this soil in America. Are you shocked to hear that? Under Obama, that was what happened. Many of the state judges, okay, I think the first one started in either Illinois or Minnesota, okay, because there's so many Muslims here now of the Islamic faith that they said, well, we're not subject to your law. We have a right to be tried and heard under Sharia law. And so the legal system, the Bar Association said, okay, we'll allow this. And they helped set up these Sharia law courts to where they commit a crime, and a crime like you and I or anybody else in America commits, they don't end up in our secular courts. They end up in their Sharia law court for trial. Okay, so here's what Sharia law basically is. It's a religious law forming part of the Islamic tradition which regulates public behavior, private behavior, and even private beliefs. Of all legal systems in the world today, the Sharia law is the most intrusive and restrictive, especially against women. Okay, now what are the underlying motives of these courts? Yeah, in a foreign land is to eventually bring you and I under that jurisdiction. In their own words, they admitted it. These leaders, these people who are pushing for these Islam people pushing this in America have said that, to bring all of us under their law so we can be tried under their religious doctrine. Think about that. Okay. The historic phrase, a government of law and not of men, epitomizes the distinction character of political society. I just read that. Law alone saves a society from being ruled by mere brute power, however disguised. If one man can be allowed to determine for himself what laws every man can, that means there's chaos and tyranny. What we're talking about here is democracy versus republic. All right. Let me break the words down, what they mean. We hear this over and over again in America today. We got to make the world safe for democracy. And I go, oh yeah, right on. Bring it on. All right, let me just show you what the founders had to say about democracy. Not good. Okay, democracy comes from two Greek words: demos, meaning people, and kratein, I mean, to rule. So it's people to rule, or the rule of men, or majority rule, which equals mob rule. So democracy is mob rule. Virtually every one of the founders understood this implicitly. It's mob rule. That's why they gave us a republic. It comes from the Latin, res, thing, and publica, public. So the public thing, or the law, which is the rule of law. This is where we get our rule of law. A republic is a rule of law. Alexander Hamilton had this to say: we are a republican government. Real liberty is never found in the despotism or in the extremes of democracy. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution for the United States of America. This is what it says. The United States shall guarantee to every state of this union a republican form of government. It shall protect each of them against invasion and on application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature cannot be convened against domestic violence. So guess what? The United States can and is charged with protecting us in the states against invasion from outside and also from domestic violence if the state legislatures are unable to take care of the matter, if they can't convene. Okay, but see that. Guarantee to every state of the union a republican form of government. It doesn't say democratic form of government. It doesn't say socialist or communist or any other form of government. Republican specifically. Okay, so and what's an interesting side note here is that you will not find the word Democrat or democracy or democratic in any of the state constitutions of any of the states of the Union. Interesting, right? Democracy. Now, this was taken from the Soldiers Training Manual, November 30, 1928, issued by the War Department. So this is official training manual of the day, 2000-25, page 118 and 120, on the topic of democracy. Here's what they had to say. A government of the masses, authority derived through mass meeting or any other form of direct expression, results in mobocracy. Attitude toward property is communistic, negating property rights. Attitude towards law is that the will of the majority shall regulate, whether it is based upon deliberation or governed by passion, prejudice, impulse, or without restraint or regard to consequences. Results in demagogism, license, agitation, discontent, anarchy. Well, there's your definition of democracy. I don't know about you, but I know which one I want. All right, from that same Soldiers Training Manual issued by the War Department, 1928, here's what they described a republic to mean. Authority derived through the elected by the people of public officials best fitted to represent them. Attitudes towards property is respect for laws and individual rights and a sensible economic procedure. Attitude toward law is the administration of justice in accord with fixed principles and established evidence, with a strict regard to consequences. A greater number of citizens and extent of territory may be brought within its compass. It avoids the dangerous extremes of either tyranny or mobocracy, results in statesmanship, liberty, reason, justice, contentment, and progress. Wow. How many people know this? How come all these congressmen and senators are, including the president, are telling us how great our democracy is and how they're wanting to make the world safe for democracy? Democracy leads to tyranny, and tyranny leads to, and socialism, by the way, which ultimately leads to tyrannical dictatorships. Okay. Herbert Spencer once said, a Republican form of government is the highest form of government, but because of this, it requires the highest type of human nature, a type nowhere at present existing. Well, I don't know about you, but I hope to help change that. Okay. Okay. Justice, freedom, all those principles, liberty, are found in a Republican form of government. It's not found under a democracy. And by the way, there's no such thing as a democratic republic. That's an oxymoron. Let me just remind you of the ancient Chinese proverb. Wisdom is calling things by their right name. Wisdom is calling things by their right name. All right, James Madison, here's what he had to say about democracies. They have ever been spectacle of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Theoretic politicians who have patronized this species of government have erroneously supposed that by reducing mankind to a perfect equality in their political rights, they would at the same time be perfectly equalized and assimilated in their passions, their opinions, and their passions. Thomas Jefferson said, yes, we did produce a near perfect republic, but will they keep it, or will they, in the enjoyment of plenty, lose the memory of freedom? Material abundance without character is the surest way to destruction. All right, now I just want to briefly introduce you to two terms. The one is de facto, because in California, that's what we're living under. This is a de facto government. De facto is in fact, indeed, actually. This phrase is used to characterize an officer, a government, a past action, or a state of affairs which must be accepted for all practical purposes, but is illegal or illegitimate. Thus, an officer, king, or government de facto is one who is in actual possession of the office or supreme power, but by usurpation or without lawful title. But by usurpation or without lawful title. That's what we have going on in California. We actually have it going on throughout the entire United States, de facto. Versus de jure. De jure is of right. It's legitimate, lawful, by right and just title. Under the original Constitution, we were de jure. In this sense, it is contrary to of de facto. As relating to government, a government of right, the true and lawful government, a government established according to the Constitution of the state and lawfully entitled to recognition and supremacy. Okay, we want to bring it back to a de jure government, where all these government officials are obeying the law and doing what they're supposed to do and staying out of our face. De facto governments are always in our face. That's what we don't want. Okay. All right. let's get into the codes, rules, regulations, statutes, and so on, and all that nonsense. All right. I'm going to give you some definitions here, and then we're going to sum it all up as to what this all really means to you and I. A code, a general collection of acts of the legislature, a complete system of positive law, scientifically arranged and promulgated by legislative authority. All right, see back here, we've got positive law, a system of positive law. What is positive law? A law actually and specifically enacted or adopted by proper authority for the government of an organized jural society. Did you get that? Law actually and specifically enacted or adopted by proper authority for, not for me, not for you, for the government of an organized jural society. Well, what's a jural society? That's used as a synonym of state or organized political community. So if you're not a state or organized political community, you need to consider who this or who these codes, rules, regulations, whatnot, apply to. All right, so here we have the typical codes. We got, and there's more than just this. We got civil code, we got civil code of procedures, commerce code, criminal code, penal code, vehicle code. You got business professions code, so on and so on and so on. All right, but let's just talk a little bit about these and what they all mean. That tile majority shall prevail is a rule posterior to the formation of government and results from it. It's not a rule binding upon mankind in their natural state. There every man is independent of all laws, except those prescribed by nature. He is not bound by any institutions formed by his fellow man without his consent. Cruden versus Neal, North Carolina case 1796. By the way, it still applies to us today, even though it was 1796, it still applies, folks. Rule, as a noun, an established standard, a guide or regulation, a principle or regulation set up by authority, prescribing or directing action or forbearance, as the rules of a legislative body, of a company, court, public office, of the law, of ethics, and so forth. As a verb, it's to command or require by a rule of court, to settle or decide a point of law arising upon a trial at nisi prius. And when it is said of a judge presiding at such a trial that he ruled so-and-so, it is meant that he laid down, settled, or decided such and such to be the law. Okay? That's what a rule is. Where rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rule making or legislation which would abrogate or abolish them. U.S. Supreme Court, Miranda versus Arizona. Okay. So in other words, we have rights that are secured by the Constitution. And because of that, no one can make a rule or legislation which would take that away from us. Can't be done. Regulation, the act of regulating, a rule or order prescribed for management of government, management or government. Interesting, isn't that? The act of regulating, a rule or order prescribed for management or prescribed for government. A regulating principle, a precept. I don't see my name in that. I don't see your name in that. It's also a rule of order prescribed by superior or competent authority relating to action of those under its control. Statute, an act of the legislature declaring, commanding, or prohibiting something, a particular law enacted and established by the will of the legislative department of government. The written will of the legislature, solemnly expressed according to the forms necessary to constitute it the law of the state. I still don't see my name. Statutes apply only to state-created creatures known as corporations, no matter whether state, local, or federal. Wow, 1975, that's pretty darn recent. U.S. Supreme Court, Colonial Pipeline versus Triangle. Did you get that? Statutes only apply to state-created creatures known as corporations, no matter whether state, local, or federal. How is it that they're applying it to so many of the people? Think about that. All right, continuing on. The written will of the legislature, solemnly expressed according to the forms prescribed in the Constitution, an act of the legislature. This word is used in contradistinction to the common law. Did you get that? This word is used in contradistinction to the common law. I want you to think about that. Go look up the word contradistinction. Okay. 1941, Flerney versus First National Bank of Shreveport, Louisiana. Here's what the court had to say. A code or statute is not law. What? A code or statute is not law. But I just got a ticket for a vehicle code violation or penal code violation or, some other code violation. How is that possible if it's not the law? We'll get back to that. Ordinance. This is legislation, a law, a statute, a decree. This word is more usually applied to the laws of a corporation than to the acts of the legislature, as the ordinance of the city of Philadelphia. I had an interesting situation with a police officer in Foster City many, many years ago. He wanted to give me a parking ticket because I was kind of double parked in front of a grocery store in a private parking lot. And he was citing his local ordinance that the city council passed. And I brought this up to him that, hey, I'm sorry, officer, but with all due respect, your corporate laws don't apply to me. Your city council has no authority to dictate to me and then try to get me to do something and then have you enforce it. That's a criminal act, by the way. Okay, so why are you attempting to enforce something that I'm not lawfully subject to? Because what it says here, this word is more usually applied to the laws of a corporation. City of Foster City is a municipal corporation. They pass their laws for them. Okay, they're typically not upon the citizens of that city unless they surrender themselves to them. Interesting, isn't it? Orders. Ooh, executive orders. Anybody heard of executive orders? Orders from the health directors? All right, now pay attention. Rules made by a court or other competent jurisdiction. The formula is generally in those words. It is ordered, etc. Who can lawfully say it is ordered and have it lawfully enforced? Is it the legislative, judicial, or the executive branch? Okay. Well, it's not Gavin Newsom. Now, he can enforce laws if they're lawful, if they're constitutional, but if they're not constitutional, he cannot enforce them. He has no power. Okay. So the governor can't say, it is so ordered, I order you, it is so ordered that you wear a mask, that you social distance. Well, his orders were shot down by the state court. All right. Orders are also a mandate, precept, a command or direction authoritatively given, a rule or regulation. Okay. Executive order. An order or regulation issued by an executive or administrative agency of the government having the force of law. Well, I beg to differ with that if that's a general statement. They need to be more specific. Executive orders are for the internal operation of government only, specifically dealing with the executive branch only. The executive cannot order the legislative branch to do anything, and neither can it do the legislature. Can't order the legislature to do anything. All right. But we have governors who are legislating through executive orders onto the people. when they know that it's in the government code, states that executive orders are for the internal purposes and for administering the affairs of the government of that department, not upon the citizens. This is why Gavin Newsom's orders were shut down. Even though he did get a stay, but nonetheless, the court said it was unconstitutional what he did. The common law is the real law. Get this, this is a 1983 case that says that the common law is the real law. The codes, rules, regulations, policies, and statutes are not the law. They are the law of government for internal regulation, not the law of man in his separate but equal station and natural state, a sovereign foreign with respect to government generally. Now, some of you are probably hearing this for the first time and just, shaking your head and going, wow, I can't believe I'm hearing this. We've always been led to believe that all these laws, what they call laws and codes, rules, regulations, apply to us. In some certain senses, yes, they do, okay? But generally, they do not. All right, and then we got a resolution. This term is usually employed to denote the adoption of a motion, the subject matter of which would not properly constitute a statute, such as a mere expression of opinion or alteration or the rules. It's like we hear city council passing resolutions to do this and mandate that. Congress passes resolutions or joint resolutions. We hear this all the time. Well, look at this. A concurrent or joint resolution is not law. And they cannot enforce it as law. So now that you all know this, you've got a lot of ammunition in your arsenal now. You can go up against it now with what you know here and say, you know what? There ain't nothing that you say, think, or do that applies to me. So get off my back and get out of my face. All right, what time we got here? All right. I'm afraid, Clint, we're getting down to the wire here. If we start due process of law, we'll get partway through it and then we'll have to pick up next week. Should we just do that? Just go as far as we can?
There's that, or we can take some questions, because there's a lot of information. Maybe people have some trouble digesting, and a few questions of clarity.
Okay. All right, I'm perfectly open to taking questions and answers. By the way, this section on due process of law, we're going to be getting into the real nuts and bolts of things that you out there on the street will be able to utilize and in your defense and your offense, if you will. All right. Very important stuff to know. And you're not going to be disappointed, I guarantee you. So should we do that, Clint? Open up to questions? I know there's a lot of questions, always is.
Yeah, so let's end screen sharing for the moment, and I'll direct people to raise your hand, and then I'll unmute you. Answer your question. Again, there's just been a lot of terms and definitions and things. So what we're looking for questions to help with the clarity, because that's really the overall goal of tonight, is to get really clear on all these different words that just kind of get used casually, and like laws, in the word law versus statute, that interchangeably, there's not a lot of distinction. So really he was, Fritz is here to define these things in the first place. They're not all the same. They have different meanings, and what law is itself. Okay, who's next? Michael Jaguar, are you there?
Hey, thank you so much, Fritz. I appreciate this.
Hi, Michael.
It's just so in depth. It's more than I was even hoping for. So thank you. I had a question. it's been interesting hearing all this about how, you know, these codes don't apply and all this stuff. And then you were saying that they, correct me if I'm wrong, these codes in certain cases, they would apply only to corporations in that area or whatever, or jurisdiction or something. And the reason I'm asking is because our a bunch of us are in a group of people here in the East Bay that get together, and there's been a lot of talk about buying land. And then last night we had a class around this, around permaculture, my friend was doing, and there was different options mentioned: a trust, creating a corporation or an LLC, um, and these different like business entities to purchase land. And then now what I'm hearing from what you said is that like maybe being incorporated isn't necessarily always a good thing, because I think the idea that we get promoted is like, oh well, if you get sued then it doesn't hit you directly, or and you have better tax things or whatever. And now what I'm hearing from you is like that sounds more like playing into their game more. And so I don't know, I wondered what you had to say on that, as far as like I don't know what other options there are as far as a group of people buying land, but yeah, I was just curious what you had to say about that.
Well, Michael, avoiding giving legal advice,
Of course.
I'll say this. If it were me, and yes, I've been looking at land also with some other people to purchase. I'll tell you this much: you will not be under an LLC or any corporate structure. All right, that can be a trap, and for those who want to remain free, so to speak, need to really assess what's out there and what the benefit of those things are and what the detriment of those things are, and see and weigh it. Okay, you ultimately would need to make the decision, right? I couldn't do that for you.
Of course.
However, my experience is that most of these things are snares to us. All right. And so there are other ways. There are certain types of business trusts, or unincorporated business trusts, or other types of trusts that you could possibly look at. You know, and there are some people I could, you know, refer you to perhaps.
I would appreciate that.
But yeah, I would be very careful with anything corporate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, anything that's conventional, let's put it that way.
Okay.
I mean, if we look at what many of the elitists do, it's, you know, they're not using corporations that I can tell to protect their own personal selves. Okay. Maybe a certain areas of business, perhaps, okay, that their name doesn't even seem to be associated with, seemingly. Okay. But most of these people got very specific type trusts to deal with the situation that they're in.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
Thank you.
governing their billions of dollars.
And that, I'm assuming then that applies to like nonprofits, 501c3. Now that I'm doing this, I'm like, oh, that just sounds like some business code thing.
Yes, I'm very leery. I still am learning things about corporations, and even, you know, I consider myself a pretty darn good authority on the IRS. All right, having beat them in federal court, I don't like the thought of even signing anything that comes from the IRS. However, I'm learning that there may be an arm's length way to do that and not take, you know, the liability along with it by doing such. Okay, and yet doing this particular thing to benefit, say, me, and protect what I have, okay, in a certain area of my life. Okay, so that's what I'm looking into currently. But anything typically with the IRS, I'm just like, you know what, I'm done there. But you know, if I can get something from them where I have no liability to them, and but yet it will benefit me if I do so, I'm all ears. Okay, see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Weigh the pros and the cons. Just do your homework. Really dig into it.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, next up we have Grace.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Fritz. Really appreciate the class, learning a lot here. I have one request and then one question. The request is I get a little videoed out these days, like everything is the rise of video. And I was wondering if I could request maybe just a simple print to PDF from the PowerPoint so that I would at least have access to the slides. I too, like Deborah, have tried to take pictures and notes and that sort of thing. But going back through video, I can certainly do it. It's just a lot more work in an already very video laden land that I'm living in.
I understand.
Cool. Yeah, if you can, great. If you can't, I totally understand. And then the clarification is from, you spoke of OSHA in your opening story at the beginning of this session. And I don't know how many people here are in the manufacturing world, but there is a new OSHA regulation where if you have 3 or more diagnosed COVID cases that you need to report to the health department. And I know you're not here to advise or give legal advice or anything like that. But if you were in my shoes, so for example, once you do report these cases, you then open yourself up to a slew of processes that you then have to get roped into, which is like mandatory testing of like everybody once a week and all of this other stuff. One way I've gotten around it from reading the regulation or guideline is it says workplace transmission. And so one way I think of kind of stepping around that, if somebody were to stick their nose where it doesn't belong, you can say, well, you can't, it was not on the property or in the workplace. So therefore, we don't need to report these cases that you say we need to report. But I don't know, any thoughts that you had on that? That just kind of came up because, there's a lot of stuff I have to deal with from OSHA.
Okay. Is this your company?
No, but I help run it.
Okay. So is this a big corporation by chance?
It's a C Corp with less than 50 people.
Okay. So you one location?
One location.
And I'm assuming in California. So the new OSHA regulation, are you talking state OSHA or federal OSHA?
This is state OSHA, this particular regulation.
OSHA.
Yeah.
Okay. Are
It's
you
Cal OSHA?
Cal OSHA. Okay. Are you corporation?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, again, certain things certain scenarios come with being incorporated. Okay. My sister came to me years ago to help her get out of her corporation. She asked, what do you think I should do? I said, well, under what you told me, if it was me, I would dissolve the corporation. And she proceeded to go in that direction. And when it was all said and done, she was so happy because things were so much better for her in her life because of it. Personal choice. Okay, again. But, first you have to ask yourself the question, if these mandates are coming from the state, how is it that you became subject to their jurisdiction? How is it that you became a subject, if you will, of that entity, that you are to obey what they tell you? Okay. What is it? What is the nexus that ties you to Cal OSHA? All right. There's a whole series of things. All right. And this is what's difficult because businesses, over time they get established. They do certain things, they get established, and and they're starting to make some profit. And when you tell them this alternative method, they kind of go, wait a minute, that might put my profit and future profit in jeopardy. Well, perhaps it may. Again, you have to assess all the pros and cons of doing what you're doing and why you're doing it. But in your situation, I would just get a piece of paper and write down every connection you have with the state county and city that you're in? What are all of the applications that you or your company has made to the government along the way? And also your connection with the taxing authorities, Franchise Tax Board, Board of Equalization, IRS, whatever it may be. Okay, see where these things may be fouling you up. Okay, because there are things, you know, that they do or get you to do that brings you under their, you know, jurisdiction, if you will. And if that be the case, then yeah, it's almost like they can do whatever they want. But in reality, still, you still have rights, don't you? In spite of all this, don't you have rights? Well, you do. Even when you're tied this deeply into the system, you still have rights. So now it's a matter of knowing exactly what your rights are and pitting them against what they're trying to do, and just start to keep them at bay. You know, this is what I did with the IRS, and it seems to have worked. I mean, I haven't heard from them since 1994, since my trial. Okay, and they actually agreed to leave me alone. They actually agreed to leave me alone, and the IRS apologized to me. So if you become proactive in this, learn everything you need to learn about your connection between the government. We call it the nexus. What is the nexus between you or your company and the government? Is it the corporation? Well, that's a huge part of it. All right. Along with incorporation, most of the time brings your requirement to file your 1040 to pay your taxes. All right. So you got to think about these things. And if you really feel strong enough about it, then maybe start looking at going through a process to undo all of these different things that create a nexus. All right. But here's the thing. Here's been my experience, and this is going to come up in the workshop. It's very important to understand this. Even though you and your company are in this tightly wound with the government, that still doesn't mean that you can't have a very successful remedy with serving them with one particular type of a document, for instance. Okay, conditional acceptance. They came to you, your company, with a notice, probably in the mail, right? Saying that you got to perform under these regulations. You got to start reporting this and that. Okay, I would word up. If it was me, I would start with a conditional acceptance. They've worked for me. I've never, ever, ever had a conditional acceptance not work for me the very first time I used it. Okay, properly worded one. You're going to learn this in the workshops. Okay, but properly worded, you serve it upon them. You do it properly. You keep a record of everything you do. You serve them properly, and see what happens. Because the squeaky wheel in this instance is not what gets the grease. It's the squeaky wheel that usually gets ignored. They back off away from the squeaky wheel. That's what you want to have happen. And if it works for you, fine. Most of the time, all the time that I've had it, works. And the other people I've helped with conditional acceptance has worked. Do you live in the Bay Area? Okay, real quick case happened in San Francisco. Sheriff Mercarimi, a year and a half, 2 years ago, when he was elected sheriff, a whole issue over domestic violence between him and his wife came up. It was headline news for a year and a half at least. Every time you turn the news on, it was about Sheriff Mercarimi. All right, okay, and Mayor Ed Lee wanted to get this guy. He wanted to force him out of office because, that's unacceptable for a sheriff, a law enforcement agent, to be battering his wife. So they claimed. Okay. Well, him and his wife worked it out. She was happy with the deal. She has no problem with the arrangement that came out of that deal with the domestic violence issue. But Ed Lee still wanted to get him out of office. But Ed Lee finally realized he had no power. It wasn't his jurisdiction to do that. So what did Ed Lee do? He went behind everybody's back, the public's back, and he went to every Board of Supervisor member in the city of San Francisco, personally saying, hey, will you support this move, this motion to, with your other board members to subpoena him into a hearing before the board to answer questions concerning his, ability to perform his duties in office. And then after that, take a direct vote whether they would vote him out of office or not, to remove him from office. The Board of Supervisors, all of them agreed unanimously. And what they do, they served him with a subpoena to appear before the Board of Supervisors to answer questions. Okay, I forgot what day it was, but it was at 10 o'clock in the morning. And guess what Sheriff Mirkarimi did? I don't know the man, but here's what he did. And this was headline news for a long time. He served them all with a with a conditional acceptance. Every Board of Supervisors member got a conditional acceptance. And guess what? He didn't show up for the hearing that morning. The news media was there with their cameras and microphones. And guess what? They're waiting for Sheriff Mirkarimi and the whole thing to begin. Nothing happened. They asked the Board of Supervisors, what's going on? Well, the hearing's been canceled. And from that day forward, not one word about Sheriff Mirkarimi and the Board of Supervisors ever surfaced in the news media again that I ever found. And guess what? Matter settled. That's how powerful a conditional acceptance is. I've seen a conditional acceptance stop the Ninth Circuit Court in San Francisco. I've seen it stop the IRS in their action. And you're going to learn how to do this. Okay? So if you use just that document against Cal OSHA, they're going to get it. And the clerks are going to look at it and they go, I don't know what this is. They're going to take it to their boss, and the boss don't know what it is. He's going to take it to the legal department. He's going to take it to their attorneys, and the attorneys are going to say, you know what? Make this go away. I've had city attorneys after city attorneys after city attorneys after county council after county council look at these things and say to the director of that department, make it go away. We don't want to go there. And when you see how this works, you'll know why. So you have some things to look forward to. It's not all lost.
Okay, great. Thank you. Fantastic. Full question. We've gone over time, which is
okay.
All you guys seem to be rapt attention, so that's not a problem. But I do want to mention the time. And if it's okay with you, Fritz, maybe I'll make one more call for questions. Right now, there's only one hand. Is it dead? Deborah might have another question, or Jan might have a question. But can we do those two questions and then call it an evening?
Certainly.
And then Jan, did you have a question? I saw you waving your hand, so I thought maybe.
No, yeah, it's very quick and very concise. Okay, so we have this mandate to wear the mask for 100 days. I'm not going to do it on the streets. How does it work going into a shop and they have the sign up that says no mask, no entry? How does one behave in that situation?
That's a good question. That's a question that few to no people have a real answer for. This is something that none of us have ever encountered. And most of us have never even fathomed that this would happen. Okay. The problem with the whole thing is that the system, if you will, the businesses, the employees that are running them, the managers, and the government behind them who's coercing them to do this, they got the upper hand. You know, we're outnumbered. It's like you're in a movie theater and you're the only one, you know, in there that doesn't want to wear a mask, and everybody's going to gang up on you. You think you're going to survive that fight? Probably not very well. You know, I mean, do you want to sit there with the 200 people and argue with them why you're not going to put a mask on? Nobody's going to be able to see the end of the movie. So, you know, there are some things that can be done. It's just a matter of time getting organized with the right documentation and the right court cases and law sites before we can really go after these businesses.
Mhm. Same thing.
You know, to me, it's a criminal act when someone attempts to put their hand over my mouth and nose. That's what
Right.
the state's doing. That's a criminal act. I look at that as an actual criminal act, a felony criminal act. And so, you know, I'm just formulating over the months how I'm going to get even with them. How am I going to do this in law? I do believe there's a way. You know,
Well,
the government has passed these unlawful edicts, and they've gotten all these other people to obey and comply with it. Are they now the ones that are complying in collusion with the government? I believe under certain circumstances, yes, it can be deemed as collusion. That's a crime, folks.
well, my question goes to what you talked about, I think the very first week, which was if I go ahead and put my mask on to go into the grocery store because I need groceries, is that me effectively agreeing to the surrender of my rights to breathe freely?
Well, yes and no. You're giving up. You're giving up a fair amount, if you will. Yes, but what's the alternative? Here's the thing. We have relied on sources for our sustenance, if you will, in life. Most of us have relied on entities which, as it turns out, are really not our friend. They're really turning out to be our enemies. All right. And I will tell you this, I believe it's eventually going to come to a point where everything will be locked out for people like you and I, completely locked out. That day is coming, and I believe you know it's coming. Just look around. It's not a secret. This, if you've ever read Revelations in the Bible, you know what I'm talking about. The mark of the beast. I believe what's happening with this mask and the social distancing, this is the mark, the precursor to the mark of the beast. It's the trial run. Look at how much of society have submissively complied. Look, is that any indication? That should be an indication to you just how many people will accept the mark of the beast, just so they can eat, just so they can get around, just so they can, you know, be politically correct and get along. They go along to get along. Okay, that's not me. That's not you. Okay, we're going to be the vast minority when that time comes. But I'll tell you what, they have locked up the system so well that they will lock us out. What are you going to do then? All right. Well, there is an alternative. That's a topic for another day. But
Okay,
right
I'm
now,
happy to wait. I'm happy to wait. I don't want to keep everybody waiting. Yeah,
Right.
thank you.
I hope that helps a little bit.
Well,
Yeah.
So just in terms of the distinctions from tonight, so when someone goes to a store and there's a sign outside the store, whether it's printed by the store owner or given like those city printed ones that are uniform all over, making it look really official, and you do or don't go in with a mask, to me it's all happening because of this ambiguity around the lawfulness of what's happening. So the way it translates typically is people say, well, you have to, you just have to. And then of course there's people like Peggy Hall who try to make make the argument, well, you don't have to if you have a medical exemption, and you have no right to ask what my medical exemption because the ADA. So she's obviously bringing forth statutes, and her case is based on statutes and laws and rules and policies and ordinances. And I'm very clear that there's a lot of ambiguity for the average person to understand. Is it a health order? Or is it a health directive? Is it state order? Is it there's the emergency there's a statute in the state of California that gives the governor certain emergency powers. So there's all of this like mess. And so if maybe you can help Fritz by in untangling it just with the distinctions from tonight, like what's an ordinance? Are we required to follow any of them at any time ever? And do business owners have any authority over their own property to require any number of things of people who come onto their property? I mean, what does the common law say?
Well, my question, okay, concerning common law, those of us who don't wear masks, if we have been buying at a certain store, like Trader Joe's was my favorite store, they hate my guts. They told me don't ever come back. They're vicious people, vicious, contemptuous people. All right. They have hatred in their heart. And I just wonder, where did this come from all of a sudden? But as a point from coming from common law, if you and I have been purchasing at a store, and that's been our routine for year after year after year, okay, and these people know us, they, when they see us, they wave, say hi, and they're friendly under normal circumstances. And we've relied upon them for food and services. And then all of a sudden have them pull this stunt on us that we're no longer welcome if we don't comply with their demands, okay? And and we can actually tie their demands directly into the state. That's the only reason they're doing this. The state has mandated, and the CDC, okay? Have you and I suffered an injury under the common law? Is the fact that I can't go into that store any longer to purchase food an actual injury to me? I believe, yes, there is an injury there. I just have to, I'm getting pretty close. I just have to come to that point where I can word it properly, document it properly, and argue it properly in court, okay? And I believe some of these issues are going to have to go to federal court, federal lawsuits, Title 42, whatever, Section 1983 or 1208 or whatever it may be, to go after these people for discrimination, whatever it is. Let's see where the courts take it.
Okay, great.
All right. It hasn't been, we're not that far along yet.
So it's just like you've been saying, like none of these laws, none of the statutes, none of these have any applicability. And in fact, they're the criminal. They're the ones who are making the offense.
Right. Well, up here in Idaho, where I'm at right now temporarily, the governor has mandated this, kind of what they're doing in California, but not as heavy-handedly. He's Republican. Everybody thinks he's a good old boy. But there's a couple of legislatures that want to impeach him for violating the Constitution. And he did violate the Constitution by ordering these masks and the social distancing, what have you. But the point is, the governor came back and was very upset on the news media. He was saying that, I'm just acting according to the laws that the legislature passed during World War II, which gave me these emergency powers to implement upon the population. And one of the legislators says, no, regardless of what that law was back then, the legislature was unconstitutional, committed unconstitutional acts when they passed that back then. And the acts you are committing now, regardless of statute, is still unconstitutional, it's still unlawful. You're still harming people's rights. That's the thing. There is not a law on the book that can allow There are many, by the way, there are many laws in the books all over this country that allow for the violation and the stripping of your rights and my rights. Is it right? Is it constitutional? No. Once we know it, we have a defense against it, and we can go on the offensive and shut them down. Not one thing that comes out of their mouth concerning this whole COVID thing, okay? Masks, social distancing, lockdowns or everything like that, shutting the business down, none of that's lawful. It's all constitutional. It's causing harm to everyone. So yes, the business owners are feeling the harm. I'm getting the harm. You're getting harmed. We just have to get organized and learn how to present this properly and attack that harm.
Okay, thank you. All right, everyone. That's our evening for tonight. Your homework between now and the next Tuesday night session is to do all the homework that you haven't already done. So that means making a list of the areas where you've been entangled in these de facto laws, and which ones you want to start looking at getting out of. We'll call it a plan to freedom. And then you want to read the law by Frederic Bastiat and peruse the Black's Law Dictionary just to get a sense of the kinds of definitions that are in the legal sense of the definitions of words. Also, you want to read the Declaration of Independence if you haven't, and look to see how many of the crimes and usurpations that were listed in that document by the King of England at the time all seem to be similar today. And then you can watch these videos. They'll be recorded, and I encourage you to watch them again for stuff that you are, for just repetition, for review. And is there anything else, Fritz, that you'd like to point them to between now and next Tuesday?
No, not really. Just don't let all this overwhelm you. All right. Sometimes you just gotta put it aside, turn away, and rest your brain for a while. I've been through that many times, and then come back. And then when you come back, it starts to you start to get it better. So just keep at it.
Okay. So I thank you all for coming tonight and being here live. And I look forward to our class on Tuesday. Well, with that, I'll just wish you a good evening and goodbye.
All right. And thanks for everyone tuning in tonight. See you next Tuesday evening.